Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
5 years ago, if you'd told me my parents would side with my cheating ex-husband and shut me out of their lives, I'd have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Lauren, I'm 35 now, and this is the story of how my own family turned their backs on me when I needed them the most. My ex, Nick, and I had been together since we were kids. Growing up as neighbors, our families were close, constantly intertwined at barbecues, holiday gatherings, and even vacations. It felt inevitable that we'd end up together. And at 22, after years of on and off dating, our parents began pushing for marriage. I wasn't sure we were ready, but I trusted them when they said, marriage will stabilize your relationship. It didn't. Nick's career in sales took off shortly after we got married, and with it came late nights, frequent business trips, and a slow but steady distance between us. I was building my own career in design, working long hours, but I never strayed. I'd hoped we were just going through a rough patch. Then, everything unraveled. I started noticing the small things first. His phone always turned face down, vague explanations about weekend work events, and a sudden preoccupation with his appearance. One night, after he came home, late reeking of cheap perfume, I couldn't ignore my gut anymore. While he was in the shower, I grabbed his phone and found what I had been dreading: texts, explicit photos, and hotel confirmations from someone named Emily. I confronted him that night. At first, he denied it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, he broke down, saying, "It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. We can fix this." But his tears couldn't undo the betrayal. I packed a bag and drove to my parents' house. If there was one place I thought I'd find solace, it was there. But when I arrived, Nick had already called them, spinning some version of the story where he was trying to save our marriage, and I was overreacting. The moment I stepped onto their porch, I could feel the tension. My mom opened the door, barely meeting my eyes. "Lauren, you should go back home and talk to Nick," she said, her voice cold. "Mom, he cheated on me," I replied, my voice breaking. She shrugged. "Marriage isn't easy, Lauren. You can't just walk away when things get tough. This isn't all on Nick. You need to look at yourself, too." My dad appeared behind her, his face stern. "Go home and work it out," he said flatly. "Are you serious?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "He betrayed me. How can you take a side?" My mom sighed. "He called us, Lauren. He's remorseful. You're too focused on your work, and maybe that pushed him away. Marriage is about compromise." Hearing those words from my own parents felt like a knife to the heart. "I'm your daughter," I whispered. "How can you do this to me?" But they wouldn't budge. That night, I sat in my car outside their house, sobbing before calling my best friend Mia. She didn't hesitate to take me in. "Forget them," she said. "You don't need people who can't see how strong you are." In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce, found a small apartment, and began piecing my life back together. Nick tried to contact me, claiming we could still salvage our marriage, but I wasn't interested. My parents, on the other hand, were relentless. They called to lecture me about giving up and even tried to set up surprise meetings with Nick to talk things through. Eventually, I blocked all of them: Nick, my parents, even a few mutual family friends who took their side. Their betrayal stung more than Nick's affair ever could. He was one man, but they were supposed to be my family, my safe place. Yet, they had chosen him over me. I thought cutting them off would be the end of it, but little did I know, they weren't done with me yet. After the divorce, my parents' silence was deafening. The people who had raised me, who I thought would always have my back, had disappeared. But honestly, it was a relief. Their judgment, their constant insistence that I was the one who had failed, had become unbearable. Mia, my best friend, was my anchor in those turbulent months. She let me stay with her while I figured out my next steps. I found a small apartment across town and started a new job in marketing, throwing myself into the work to distract from the pain. Therapy became my safe space to unpack the emotional wreckage, not just of Nick's betrayal, but of my parents too. Nick, though, wasn't ready to let go. He bombarded me with texts and voicemails, promising that we could work things out. Emily was a mistake, he'd say, his voice dripping with desperation. He even showed up uninvited one night, flowers in hand, claiming he'd changed. I didn't let him pass the door. By then, I was done with his lies. What stung most wasn't Nick's empty gestures. It was learning from mutual friends that my parents were still in contact with him. They'd attended dinner parties at the home Nick now shared with Emily. The thought of them sipping wine with the woman who had helped destroy my marriage made me physically ill. "They've made their choice," Mia said one night as we split a bottle of wine on her couch. "You don't need them, Lauren. Focus on yourself." So I did. I buried myself in work, chasing promotions, and learning to love the independence that came with starting over. Therapy helped me see the cracks in my parents' facade, how their obsession with appearances and loyalty to Nick wasn't about me. It was about their need to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. As the years passed, my parents and I became strangers who shared a last name. We'd occasionally cross paths at family events, but the interactions were brief and frosty. They didn't congratulate me when I bought my first home or when I landed my dream job. They didn't reach out to mend things. I told myself I was okay with that. Then, 3 years ago, I met Charlie. It started as an ordinary night out with Mia. We were at a cozy restaurant, laughing over shared appetizers, when Charlie, the owner, stopped by our table. He had an easy smile and a warmth that put me at ease instantly. "Let me know if there's anything else I can do to make your night perfect," he said, and I felt a flutter I hadn't felt in years. We exchanged numbers that night. What began as a few casual dates quickly turned into something serious. Charlie wasn't just kind and attentive. He was genuine, hardworking, and completely disarming. As it turned out, he came from a prominent family who owned a well-known bakery chain in the state, but his humility made it easy to forget his background. I fell from hard. For 3 blissful years, Charlie and I built a life together, far removed from the toxicity of my past. He knew about my parents and Nick and never once judged me for the walls I'd built around my heart. When he proposed 6 months ago, during a quiet night at home, I knew I was finally ready to say yes. I was excited to share the news with the people who had stood by me: Mia, my friends, and Charlie's loving family. What I didn't expect was for the announcement to bring my estranged parents crashing back into my life. Their reappearance wasn't a heartfelt phone call or a handwritten letter. It was an email dripping with faux sincerity. They'd just heard about my engagement and wanted to apologize for the past. I wasn't naive. I knew this had nothing to do with regret or love for me. It had everything to do with Charlie and the kind of family I was about to marry into. Charlie's proposal was a moment I'll never forget. It was just the two of us, tucked into a quiet corner of his restaurant after hours. Soft music played in the background as he slid a ring onto my finger and asked me to be his forever. Tears blurred my vision as I said yes, my heart swelling with a joy I hadn't felt in years. The days that followed were a whirlwind of excitement. Mia screamed when I told her the news, and Charlie's family welcomed me with open arms, already treating me like one of their own. When we posted a simple engagement announcement on social media, the flood of well wishes from friends and extended family was overwhelming. But amidst the congratulatory messages, one email stopped me cold. It was from my parents. "Dear Lauren, we heard the wonderful news about your engagement. Congratulations to you and Charlie. We've wanted to reach out for a long time, but didn't know how. We regret the way things ended between us and hope we can rebuild our relationship. We'd love to be part of your wedding if you'll have us. Love, Mom and Dad." I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for it to hit differently. It didn't. For 5 years, they had ignored me. No calls, no birthday wishes, not even a word when I bought my first house. And now, suddenly, they wanted to rebuild our relationship? I didn't reply. A few days later, another email arrived. This one made my stomach churn. "Charlie seems like a wonderful man. We've read so much about his family and their business. What an impressive background. We're so proud of you for finding someone like him. It's no wonder we felt compelled to reach out. Please let us know how we can support you during this exciting time." There it was, the real reason behind their sudden interest. They weren't reaching out because they missed me or regretted their actions. They were reaching out because of Charlie, because of his family's wealth, his connections, and what they thought it could mean for them. Not a single word in either email acknowledged their behavior during my divorce. No apology for siding with Nick, for shutting me out, for years of silence. Instead, their focus was on how proud they were of me for catching someone like Charlie. It was insulting. They didn't care about me. They cared about the status my engagement could bring them. When Charlie got home that evening, I showed him the emails. "Am I crazy, or does this feel calculated?" I asked. Charlie's jaw tightened as he read. "You're not crazy," he said. "They're trying to worm their way back in because of my last name, not because they've had some epiphany about how they treated you." Hearing him say it out loud validated everything I was feeling. "I'm blocking them," I said firmly, grabbing my laptop. "Good," Charlie replied. "You don't owe them anything." And just like that, their email addresses were gone from my inbox, along with any lingering hope I had for genuine reconciliation. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. My parents weren't about to give up so easily. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Charlie and I had just finished dinner and were curled up on the couch, watching a rerun of The Office. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, startling both of us. "Are we expecting anyone?" Charlie asked, already rising to answer it. I shook my head. "Probably just a package," I said, distracted. Charlie opened the door, and his posture stiffened immediately. "Lauren," he called, his voice sharp, "it's your parents?" I felt a chill run down my spine. My parents? How did they even know where I lived? I stood, my heartbeat quickening, and walked to the door, Charlie close behind me. There they were, standing on my porch like ghosts from a past I'd tried to leave behind. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her face a mix of nervousness and determination. My dad looked equally uncomfortable, but there was a hint of defiance in his stance. "We need to talk," my mom said, her voice tight. I crossed my arms, keeping my expression as neutral as I could. "How did you find my address?" They ignored the question. My dad took a step forward, hands raised in what I assumed was meant to be a gesture of peace. "We just want to apologize," he said. "We know we hurt you, Lauren, and we've realized how much we've missed out on. We don't want to lose you completely." The anger that had simmered for years flared up. "You don't want to lose me?" I repeated. "You already did. You lost me 5 years ago when you sided with Nick and shut me out." My mom started to speak, but I cut her off. What changed? Was it the guilt? Or was it my engagement? Her face flushed, and she glanced at my dad, as if looking for backup. "It's not about Charlie or his family," my dad said, his voice firm. "It's about you. We made mistakes, but we're here now, trying to make things right." I didn't buy it. If they cared so much about me, why had it taken them half a decade to realize it? Charlie moved closer, his hand resting gently on my back. His silent support steadied me as I stood my ground. "You don't get to show up uninvited and expect me to forgive you," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "If you were truly sorry, you'd respect my boundaries. This isn't how you fix things." My dad's patience snapped. His face darkened, and his tone turned sharp. "You're acting arrogant, Lauren. Just because you're marrying into money doesn't mean you can treat us like this. Nick might have cheated, but at least he wasn't so full of himself." The words hit like a slap, and I froze, too stunned to respond. Charlie didn't miss a beat. He stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "I'm not going to take relationship advice from people who turn their backs on their own daughter. Let's be clear. Lauren isn't treating you poorly because of money. She's treating you this way because you earned it." My dad opened his mouth to argue, but my mom grabbed his arm, shaking her head. "Let's go," she muttered, casting a final, pleading look in my direction. They walked back to their car, my dad grumbling under his breath the whole way. Charlie closed the door and turned to me. "You okay?" I exhaled, letting out the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. "I think so," I said, though my voice wavered. He pulled me in his arms, holding me tightly. "You don't owe them anything," he whispered. And as I leaned into him, I realized he was right. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear from them. I had barely settled back into my routine when the next wave of drama arrived. My phone buzzed one afternoon, and I saw my paternal grandparents' number flashing on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. They had always been the neutral ones, staying out of my messy estrangement from my parents, so their sudden interest felt ominous. I answered, and after the usual pleasantries, my grandmother's tone shifted. "Claire," she began, "we heard about the incident with your parents. Don't you think you've been a little too harsh on them?" A knot formed in my stomach. "Did they tell you everything?" I asked, my voice sharp. "How they chose Nick over me, how they let me stand outside their house, crying, while siding with the man who cheated on me?" "Yes, we know," my grandmother said gently, as if her understanding would make me forget the years of hurt. "But Claire, people make mistakes. They're trying to make amends now. Can't you at least meet them halfway?" I laughed, the sound bitter and raw. It's funny how they only care now that I'm engaged to someone like Charlie. Where was this desire to make amends when I was at my lowest, begging for their support? My grandfather's voice joined the conversation, stern and unyielding. "They were wrong," he admitted, "but they're still your parents. Charlie may love you now, but family is forever. You don't throw that away because of a rough patch." "A rough patch?" I repeated, incredulous. "They turned their backs on me for 5 years. That's not a rough patch. It's a pattern. Think carefully," my grandfather continued. "A husband is temporary, but family? They're always there. Don't let a man influence your decisions." The comment hit a nerve, but I kept my composure. This has nothing to do with Charlie and everything to do with how they treated me. If they want forgiveness, they'll have to earn it. And honestly, I'm not sure they ever will. I ended the call shortly after, my hands trembling with frustration. My grandparents, the supposed peacemakers of the family, were now pressuring me to overlook years of betrayal as if it were a minor misunderstanding. Their attempt to guilt me into reconciliation felt like a deeper betrayal, one I hadn't anticipated. That evening, I recounted the call to Charlie as we prepared dinner. His expression darkened as I spoke, and by the time I finished, he set down the knife he was using to chop vegetables. "They're just like your parents," he said bluntly. "It's not about fixing the relationship. It's about saving face. They only care because your engagement makes them look bad if they're not part of your life." I leaned against the counter, sighing. "I know you're right, but it's exhausting. The constant pressure, the guilt trips, it's like they think my forgiveness is owed to them." Charlie walked over and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You don't owe anyone anything, Claire. Not your parents, not your grandparents. Especially not after what they put you through." His words were comforting, but they didn't erase the doubt gnawing at me. Could I truly cut my family out forever? Or was I letting my anger blind me to the possibility of rebuilding something? As I stared into the bubbling pot on the stove, I realized I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let anyone rush me into a decision I wasn't ready to make. The knock on the door that evening carried an air of inevitability. As soon as I opened it, there they were, my parents, looking far less confident than during their previous visit. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, their postures deflated, but I couldn't tell if it was from genuine remorse or frustration at their inability to wear me down. "We're not here to argue," my mom said quickly, her voice soft but strained. "We just want to apologize and explain." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "You've got 5 minutes?" My dad started, his tone unusually subdued. "We know we handled things terribly. When Nick cheated, we should have supported you. But we didn't, and there's no excuse for that." He paused, looking genuinely conflicted. "We were scared. Scared of losing the connection to his family. Scared of what people would say. And in the process, we lost you." I stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation. This was the closest he had ever come to admitting fault. My mom stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "Claire, we've spent the past 5 years regretting what we did. And now, with the wedding, we just want to be there for you, to be part of your life again. We're not asking for everything at once, just a chance to make things right." Her words stirred something inside me. A tiny part of me wanted to believe them, to think they were capable of real change. But years of bitterness and betrayal aren't easily forgotten. Before I could respond, my dad added, "It's not just about us. It's about family. Charlie needs to see that you can maintain those bonds, that you value them." The sincerity I had started to believe crumbled into ash. His statement wasn't about me or my feelings. It was about appearances, about projecting the illusion of a picture-perfect family for Charlie's benefit. Charlie had been listening from the next room, but he stepped forward now, his expression dark. "This isn't about family bonds," he said, his voice steady and firm. "It's about control. Claire doesn't owe anyone her forgiveness, least of all you, and she certainly doesn't need to prove anything to me. If you're really here to make things right, stop using guilt as a weapon." My parents opened their mouths to argue, but I cut them off. "He's right. You're not entitled to forgiveness just because you finally decided to show up. I need time and space to figure out if reconciliation is even possible. Respect that." And before they could say another word, I closed the door. Charlie pulled me into a hug, his arms warm and steady. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, but my mind was a storm. Part of me wondered if I had just slammed the door on a second chance. The other part was certain I'd made the right choice. For now, I needed space, and I wasn't about to let them rush me into a decision I wasn't ready to make. When I thought my parents couldn't stoop any lower, they found new ways to test me. After the confrontation in my house, I hoped they would back off, but instead, they doubled down. Their desperation morphed into relentless outreach, targeting anyone they thought might influence me. It started subtly, calls and texts to mutual acquaintances. Then I got a call from Megan, my cousin, and one of the few people in my family who had stayed neutral through it all. "Claire," she said cautiously, "I've been meaning to talk to you. Your parents called me. They're persistent. They say they're desperate to reconcile, but you won't let them." I sighed, the weight of her words settling in. "Megan, this isn't about reconciliation. It's about control. They've had 5 years to apologize, but they only started caring when I got engaged." "What does that tell you?" Megan paused, clearly torn. "They're spinning the story, Claire. They're telling people that Charlie's the one keeping you away from them, that he's convinced you to abandon your family. That hit a nerve. Let me stop you right there, I said sharply. Charlie hasn't convinced me of anything. My parents chose to side with Nick. They shut me out when I needed them, and now they're mad I found happiness without them. This is all on them. Megan stayed quiet for a moment, then said, I get it, Claire. I really do. I just wanted to let you know what's going on before it escalates further. It didn't take long for her warning to prove true. A week later, I received a formal letter from my parents. The language was carefully curated, dripping with faux sincerity. We deeply regret the pain we've caused, it read. We understand your anger, but we believe family is sacred. Please let us attend your wedding. We're willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild this relationship. But then came the kicker, a thinly veiled ultimatum. If you shut us out of your life completely, we'll have no choice but to share our side of the story with the family. It breaks our hearts to think that misunderstandings might cloud the truth, but we feel we owe it to everyone involved. I stared at the letter, disbelief giving way to anger. This wasn't an olive branch. It was emotional blackmail. When I showed it to Charlie, his reaction was immediate. This is manipulation, he said firmly, his jaw tight with frustration. They don't care about making things right. They care about appearances. If they want to tell their side, let them. Anyone who knows you will see through it. He was right. I ripped the letter in half, then tore it into tiny pieces before tossing it in the trash. Let them say whatever they want, I said, feeling a sense of finality. The people who matter know the truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was reclaiming control over my life. A few days after I tore up my parents' letter, the pressure from my family escalated. This time, it came in the form of an unannounced visit from my grandparents. Charlie and I were heading out for a date night when we found them waiting outside my apartment building. Claire, we need to talk, my grandfather said, his voice more forceful than I'd ever heard. Charlie stepped in immediately, his protective instincts kicking in. Now's not a good time, he said, his tone firm but polite. We're heading out, and Claire's made her boundaries clear. My grandmother wasn't so easily deterred. She stepped closer, her expression pleading. Please, Charlie, you seem like a reasonable man. Can't you convince Claire to see that family is worth fighting for? This isn't just about her parents. It's about the entire family. These wounds don't heal overnight, but cutting ties isn't the answer. Charlie's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. With all due respect, Claire's choices are hers to make. She doesn't need me or anyone else telling her how to feel about what happened. If her parents wanted to be part of her life, they should have shown up when it mattered. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about trust, and they broke that a long time ago. His words hit their mark. My grandfather's stern expression faltered, and my grandmother's eyes filled with tears. They turned their attention to me, hoping I'd be more lenient. Claire, my grandfather began, his voice softer now, you're making a mistake. Family is all we have. You might not see it now, but one day you'll regret cutting your parents out of your life. What if something happens to them? What if you lose the chance to make things right? Their words stung, but I refused to let them see it. Funny, I said, my tone cold, because when I needed family, my parents didn't seem to think it was all we had. They slammed the door in my face when I was at my lowest, and you stayed silent while they did it. So no, I don't think I'll regret protecting myself. My grandparents looked at me as if they didn't recognize the person I'd become. Without another word, they turned and walked away, leaving me standing with Charlie at the door. As I watched them go, a strange mix of emotions churned inside me. Part of me still longed for the unconditional love I'd once thought family was supposed to provide. But another part, the stronger part, knew I was better off without their conditional affection and endless manipulation. Charlie took my hand as we stepped into the car. You handled that perfectly, he said, giving me a reassuring squeeze. Thanks, I replied, though my voice was tinged with sadness. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. Sometimes protecting your peace means making hard choices, Charlie said. But you're not alone in this, Claire. I'm with you. And for the first time that night, I felt a small but comforting sense of relief. 2 months passed with surprising calm. With no surprise visits or guilt-laden messages, I allowed myself to focus entirely on wedding planning. Charlie and I were deep into finalizing details for the big day, and for the first time in years, I felt like the past wasn't looming over me. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We heard from Megan that the wedding is next month. Please, Claire, we just want to talk. We've made mistakes, but we've also given you everything. Don't shut us out forever. The message was from my mother. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without a reply. But the next day, they escalated. My parents showed up at my apartment again. This time, they weren't empty-handed. They held a bouquet of flowers in a neatly wrapped box, and my dad clutched a letter in his hand. I refused to let them in, speaking to them through the barely cracked door. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice tired. "We're not here to argue," my dad said, trying to sound calm. "We just want to wish you well and make amends before it's too late." "It's already too late," I replied coldly. "You can't erase 5 years of betrayal with flowers and an apology. You made your choice when you sided with Nick. But we didn't know how to handle it," my mom said, her voice breaking. "We thought you'd go back to him, that you'd fix it like you always did. We didn't realize how much we were hurting you." I almost slammed the door then and there. But before I could, Charlie appeared beside me. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, silently reminding me that I didn't have to face this alone. "You keep saying you're sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "But this isn't about forgiveness. It's about access. To me, to Charlie, to the life I've built without you. If you truly cared, you would have supported me when I needed you. But you didn't. You chose my cheating ex-husband over your own daughter." My dad's expression shifted. The vulnerable facade cracked, revealing something harder underneath. "We're still your parents, Claire," he said sharply. "And we deserve some respect for everything we've done for you. Don't forget who raised you." Before I could respond, Charlie stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Claire has shown you more respect and patience than you deserve. If you really want to rebuild this relationship, start by respecting her boundaries. But if you can't, you need to leave. Now." For a moment, my parents stood frozen, as though they couldn't believe they were being dismissed so decisively. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away, leaving the flowers and letter on the ground. As soon as the door closed, I let out a shaky breath. "They don't get it," I said quietly. "They never will." Charlie wrapped an arm around me. "Maybe not," he said, "but you've done everything you can. Now it's up to them." I nodded, though deep down, I doubted they would ever truly change. My wedding day felt like stepping into a dream. The sun cast a golden glow over the venue. The flowers were in full bloom, and every detail was perfect. More importantly, the people who mattered most to me were there, cheering as I walked down the aisle toward Charlie. As I took each step, my mind briefly flickered to the family who wasn't there, my parents and grandparents. But the ache I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt nothing but gratitude for the people who had shown up. Sarah, my best friend, beamed as my maid of honor, wiping a tear as I passed. Charlie's family stood in the front row, their faces lit with pride. The ceremony was intimate, filled with laughter and heartfelt vows. When we kissed and the crowd erupted into applause, it wasn't just a celebration of our marriage. It was a testament to the strength and love we had fought so hard to build together. At the reception, as Charlie and I swayed under a canopy of lights, I looked around the room at the friends and chosen family who surrounded us. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. "I'm proud of you," Charlie whispered, pulling me closer. "You didn't let the past ruin this moment." Later that evening, Sarah raised a toast. "To Claire and Charlie," she said, her voice ringing with emotion. "A love built on trust, respect, and resilience. Here's to a lifetime of happiness." The crowd cheered, but her words resonated deeply with me. My parents' absence wasn't the glaring void I once feared it would be. It was a choice I had made to protect myself, and it was the right one. 2 days later, I received one last message from my parents. "Congratulations on your wedding," it read, accompanied by a photo of my childhood bedroom, now redecorated. "We've made mistakes, but we'll always be here if you need us." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Moving forward, I've chosen to focus on the life Charlie and I are building together. The people who showed up, who supported me unconditionally, are the ones I'll cherish. Forgiveness may come one day, but it won't be rushed or coerced. For now, I'm happy, at peace, and ready to embrace this new chapter, one defined not by the wounds of the past, but by the love and joy of the future.